glad it's sunny in New York, and hopefully everyone else is having a beautiful sunny Saturday morning. I'm really excited about today's talk because the moment that we're in October. So with me today, I have Katrina LeClerc, love that French last name, the first Canadian on our Saturday BU Powerfully Talk. So expanding the North America horizons. And she is a young Francophone woman from Canada, currently pursuing her PhD in conflict resolution with the focus on the synergies between the youth peace and security and the women peace and security agendas, which is such a critical moment. As some of you may know, October is the anniversary of the 1325 UN Security Council resolution. And there's going to be a big moment at the end of the month with the UN Security Council. Hopefully we have some actual commitments to implementation, because that's slow on that front. I'm sure she'll highlight that. But basically, today's talk is really about youth activism on the global stage. And so with her background, she is currently coordinating the global network of women peacebuilders, the Young Women Leaders for Peace program in East Africa, since 2016, and she's an advisor to the board of directors for the Manitoba Women of South Sudan. She also sits on the board of Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and the Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women. So she's clearly busy. She's also the former Parliamentary Affairs Advisor to the Canadian Senator and co-founder of the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security. So she's going to give her reflections basically on, as an example with the youth peace and security and women peace and security agendas, on how you can get involved on the global stage. And hopefully this will be a really lively discussion. We will have questions at the end as always. So to kick it off, I will let her say a few words, and then we'll go around and introduce everyone in the room.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm going to start screen sharing if I have the ability to.
Good.
So could you please activate that for me?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to speak with everyone this morning and afternoon and evening for some of you. Thank you, Jessica, for reaching out, and to Zahara's Dream for having me. And before I get started with my presentation, as Jessica said, we want to hear a little bit about who you are. And so I'll turn it back to you, Jessica, so we could do some introductions.
Sure. So we'll just go down the list. Joanna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Let's see here. Sorry, I don't have the volume on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. I put the kettle on downstairs. I can't get the setting. Okay, there we go. Sorry. My name is Joanna Meyer. I'm originally from California. I am interested in peace and security, obviously. I've been focusing more on Africa the last years because I speak fluent French, and I'm very interested in green economy as a tool of counterterrorism. I could say much more, but I'll let us continue on to our other friends. Thank you also for hosting us today. Thanks.
Umi?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Umi. I'm part of Zahara's Dream Team, and I'm so excited for this topic because I'm also interested in women, peace and security because it is very paramount in our everyday lives. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, I'm gonna butcher this, but Ayan?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am here, and I am a part of Zahara Dream member, and I'm very excited to hear about Dream. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay. The Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security? Whoever's behind that.
Hi everyone, it's Alexandria. I'm another co-founder of the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security. And so I work specifically looking at the engagement of children and youth in Canada within the peace movement.
Carolyn?
Hi everyone, my name is Carlin. I'm a Zahara's Dream Mentee. My professional and personal focus is digital communications, digital marketing, related to STEM education for youth.
Carlin, I swear I'm gonna get it right next time. I was like, it's one or the other, I can't remember.
Okay.
Isabel?
Bonjour, hi everyone. I'm a school principal in Vancouver, Canada, but most importantly, je suis la maman de Katrina.
Wow.
Jacques?
Hi everyone, I'm Katrina's partner. Really proud of her and always here to support.
Yes! I love that we have some male engagement, even though it may be forced, maybe not.
I wanted to come, don't worry.
Great. Kelly Bogo? I mean, I know that's wrong.
Okay, hi, it's Gilebuchile, and I'm from Pretoria in South Africa. I'm a marketing academic, life coach, as well as a Zahara's Dream mentor. And I'm really, really interested in this topic because conflict resolution is something that's very close to me. And yeah, this is who I am. I just can't switch on my video because I just woke up from a nap. So yeah, but anyway, glad to meet everyone.
Self-care, it's Saturday. Take those naps anytime you can get them. Again, I'm sorry, guys. Uluwata. I'm sorry.
You were actually, you were getting close. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oluwadam Lola Akitewe from Ondo, Nigeria. I am a law student, a feminist activist, a social entrepreneur, and I love this topic so much because 2020 is one year where everything moved online and we saw the power of digitalization in creating change. And as an activist who is passionate about women development, equality, and all that, I see it as an opportunity to learn on how to use activism both online, offline, to effect change and improve the standard of living of women in Nigeria, Africa, and the world at large. Thank you.
Last but not least, Quincy.
Hi everyone, my name is Quincy. I'm from Plateau State, Nigeria. I'm a gender advocate, and this topic is key to my heart, and I want to learn more today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all, and thank you for being patient with me with trying to figure out names. And I'm going to kick it back to Katrina now to be able to give her talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for your introductions. It's lovely to see the diversity of voices and presence today. So I'm going to kick it off by talking a little bit about myself. I know that Jessica gave an introduction, but I also want to talk about myself because I very firmly believe in the power of the fact that how our experiences shape who we are. And so, for example, as a young Francophone Canadian woman who grew up in British Columbia, mostly in Vancouver, which is mostly English, Anglophone and English dominated, this has very much influenced my ability to understand how the world works, and a lot so how minority rights work. And so, for example, for those of you who are not Canadian and not from Canadian context, in Canada, we were founded by colonization, through colonization of our Indigenous people by the French and the English who settled into our lands. And there's been continued frustrations and tensions and violence between the French and the English through our history. And as a Francophone person living in a minority setting, it has influenced a lot how I see and perceive the world. The other thing is that I want to talk about it a little bit is about my being a PhD student. So you'll see throughout this discussion today, I really want this to be a discussion, not just a talk, that I will be referring to us as experts and us being all of you as well. I firmly believe that we are all individuals individual experts in various ways because of how our experiences shape who we are and how they shape what we do and what we choose to do with our time. So I've chosen, for example, to endeavor to pursue my education because of the privilege that I do have to a PhD degree. However, that doesn't make me the only expert in the room. And this is something that I think hinders young people's participation in a lot of spaces, because unless we have a degree attached to our name or we have the terminology of expert attached to us in our introduction, most older folks don't necessarily understand or recognize the expertise that we come with. All of us have expertise. It's just how we use it that defines who we are. And then I'll talk about a little bit more about the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, which I'm very privileged to be a part of, and then how we came to the rowdiness of creating the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security. So what we'll talk about today, I've divided this talk in 3 major parts, and I welcome all your feedback. I want this to be a discussion, as I said, so at the end we'll be discussing, and not necessarily just a Q&A, but I want to hear also from you and your reflections on what I'll be presenting. So the first part of what I'll talk about today is young women's activism. That is the core of a lot of the work and the peace work that I do, including in my academic journey, specifically on the Young Women Leaders for Peace program, which I coordinate in Eastern Africa for the last few years. And I have had the privilege of working with these young women since 2014. The next section of my talk today will be about women, peace and security, and youth peace and security. For those of you who are less familiar with WPS and YPS, don't you worry. I'll talk a little bit about what that even is and what that means. But I'll also talk about the importance of using both UN agendas together in synergy, because I believe strongly in breaking silos. And I think a lot of you, at least those of you whom I know, also believe in breaking silos and therefore working across sectors, across different groups and different agendas to ensure that peace can be sustainable and applicable to the realities of people on the ground. And then I'll talk about, in that context, what's happening, as Jessica said, with the 20th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security this month, and also the overall Beijing plus 25 work that's been happening in 2020 and will continue in 2021. So if you're not too sure what that is, don't you worry, we're going on this learning journey together. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about how you can get involved, how I've gotten involved, but also how you can get involved both in a Canadian context, but also in your own regions. So let's get started. So the first, I'm trying to just move my little, where I see all of you so it's not in the way. So the first part is about young women's activism. So I couldn't begin talking about this without talking about the work that the young women Leaders for Peace do and the work that we do with them. And so first and foremost, the Young Women Leaders for Peace program was created and launched in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2014 in the province of South Kivu, and then expanded in 2015 in the province of North Kivu. So, and since then, we are now in 8 different countries. So we have the DRC, South Sudan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Afghanistan. And through this program, we work on various components of leadership for young women. And so it is based on a training of trainers methodology, and therefore we bring young women who are already more privileged in their communities. So for example, who live in the capital, who have been able to have some sort of formal education, and who are in positions to be able to share with other young women who are less privileged than them, different learnings that they have been taught, and that they can provide different intergenerational, but also intercommunal learning opportunities with these young women. So the 5 prongs of this program is, the first is literacy and numeracy. So this is a component that is extremely strong, as you can suspect, in the DRC, where many rural, especially young women and women, not necessarily only young women, do not know how to read or write. 99% of rural women in South Sudan, for example, are illiterate. And so we as being GNWP, the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, see this as a barrier for women to participate in all of the wonders that are women's rights and their frameworks, because at the very core, if you cannot read or write or understand what you're reading and what you're writing, how can you participate actively and how can you be taken seriously within the international spaces and your advocacy for rights? The second component is about leadership, and this includes leadership capacity building, but also leadership in terms of understanding and learning about the international frameworks, such as women, peace and security and youth, peace and security. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, so I won't cover that right now. The third component is economic empowerment. So economic empowerment is actually a new addition to the program. In 2018, we began economic empowerment programming in the DRC and also in the Philippines and Indonesia and slightly in Bangladesh. And so what we've done with them is we've provided training, technical training and assistance to the young women who are part of the program on how to create micro businesses. And I want to iterate here how important collaborative for and by youth initiatives are. So at the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, about 90% of our team are under the age of 30. So ourselves are young women. And so obviously we embody the principle of for and by young people. But as well, we try to develop our programs and their additional components with the young women on the ground. So very much under the understanding that we don't know the local context as well as they do. Obviously, that cannot be a positive way of creating peaceful societies if we come in and implement things that we believe are useful to them and they have not agreed to that, or if they don't feel local ownership of their own initiatives. So the economic empowerment work actually came out of discussions that the young women had with us, that they said that this was a part of the barriers that they faced, especially at the time in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And once we began in the DRC to do economic empowerment technical trainings, they've told us that it was really helpful, and so we continued and also brought these concepts to the other countries where we work, and they decided whether or not they wanted to buy into that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that throughout my talk today, because I, both as a PhD student in academia, focus very strongly on the component of local ownership of peace building work, but also on the ground as a academic and practitioner. So with the economic empowerment, the young women have been creating micro businesses now in South and North Kivu for the last 2 years, and they've actually become quite autonomous in the way that they're able to make a small revenue every month to be able to sustain their daily needs and the needs that their families may have. And they've found that this has been extremely helpful in countering, for example, narratives of violence, understandings within the community, and also giving them more independence and less, they're less prone to violence essentially, because they're not reliant on another member of their family to provide for certain needs that they may have. Another thing, and some of you mentioned this in your introductions, is the power of social media. So as young people, you know, I don't have to lecture you about that, but you know that the power of social media is like no other. We are able to reach so many more people now and so many more spaces. And so we've added a component of social media, and this one is extremely strong, for example, in the Philippines, in the work that the young women do in the Philippines. I'm going to, for example, I'll give you an example. In 2019, there was a referendum in the Philippines for a discriminatory law that was happening for the Muslim minority area of Mindanao. And the young women over there mobilized thousands, I tell you, thousands of young people to register to vote in the referendum to try and create a peaceful solution to this referendum and make sure that people were actually going to vote with their full conscience, their full understanding of what this even meant. And so they used social media for good, and they continue to be very, very active, including in the COVID-19 recovery efforts and with information dissemination. The fifth and final component of this program is participatory theater. So as I said before, for example, in the South Sudan context, there are very, very many women and young women who are illiterate or have not had the privilege of formal education. And therefore, they should not, we believe at least, they should not be excluded from peace work or any sort of peace building initiatives. And so we developed a methodology with them about how to create, how to use theater and create skits, essentially, so improvisation, to showcase in the communities how certain quarrels affect them in their daily lives. So instead of going out and doing, for example, a workshop, which they were not comfortable doing, they go out in communities and host basically plays, small skits, and then they dialogue with the community about what happened during the skit, what was personified, what the solutions may be to the quarrel that they were showing during their theater performances. And that's one of the ways that they open conversation with community members who may not understand the realities of young women in their context. So that's about the Young Women for Peace and Leadership program for now. I'm really excited about this program. It was actually recognized by the UN Secretary General in his first report on youth peace and security as a best practice for youth peace building. And so I'm a very big believer and pretty sold on the idea that collaborative peace building and culturally sensitive peace building, which is developed with and for the people on the ground, can actually be quite successful. Next part of this that I want to talk about young women's activism is about amplifying voices. And so I being a young woman, have often been told, and I'm sure that you probably have had this told to you as well as young women and young men perhaps as well, about empowerment. So you've probably heard oh, well, we have to do an empowerment project, or we have to empower young women to have their voices heard, or empower them to gain their voices. I think that's fundamentally wrong, in the sense that I think that there's a very big danger with the way a lot of us conceive and perceive empowerment work, and especially the fact that it's a top-down approach. And this is very predominant within peace work and within international spaces and advocacy work, because older people, not that there's anything wrong with their age, will have had different lived experiences and see themselves in a position to empower and therefore provide a space for young people, but they don't understand that young people, for example, don't need to be given a voice. They already have a voice. You and I, both of us, all of us here, we have a voice, we have certain solutions, we have certain perspectives, but it's about amplifying those voices, uplifting those voices. And so empowerment, as we define it or as we see it, is absolutely fundamentally flawed, because empowerment is another way of colonization after all. And so I think that we need to redefine the term empowerment. In its core, it has good principles, but it's in the way that people could perceive it and see it that can be very difficult for the realities of how people live their lives. The other thing I want to touch a little bit more about is the power of the digital world. A lot of us talked about, or some few of you talked about digitalization and the work that you do in that. And I think COVID-19 has actually shown us very significantly what this means, and the power of the digital world in the sense of youth activism. And this is not precluded just to young women. This is more so about young people across the board. But the digital world right now, as we see it, has given an opportunity and a platform for young people especially to do activism. So for example, in the US, and this is I guess you'll learn a little bit more about my political leaning by this example, but in the US, a lot of young people have actually been using the application TikTok to troll, if you wish, and the 45th president and their campaign to regain office in the US presidential election. And I think that this shows the power of young people and the digitalization and the good that technology and information technology can have. This is similar across various different platforms. And I think young people are miles ahead of others in their activism work because of our use of technology and social media. Now, the other thing I want to touch really quickly about technology and social media is, and I think that there are very serious barriers to access to technology which prohibit a lot of people from participating. It can be obviously very good and be very amplificator, like a very big amplifying factor to people's advocacy, but it can also hinder because there are various security concerns and barriers to access. And as the United Nations has declared it, access to information technology and to the internet, for example, is a human right. And so therefore, I think countries and other entities should make this more of a priority, especially, but not exclusively in this COVID context that we find ourselves. So the last thing about this is about the local context, but more specifically about young people and peace building more generally. The one thing I want you to really think about, and we can talk about this a little bit more, is about how in contexts where we are in wealthier countries or countries who are not perceived as being in conflict, we often do not equate ourselves as peace builders when we do any of this kind of work. Peace building is often seen as an activity that goes on, or a process that goes on in so-called developing countries. But I think that peace building can be any type of community work that you're trying to create better space for social justice, human rights, peace, and equality among our communities. And so I think we need to start kind of owning the peace building term and peace builders term, because it's not exclusively a development kind of terminology, in my opinion. Now, women, peace, and security, what is this monster? What does this mean? Women, peace, and security. So I'm a big fan, as you will tell. So Women, Peace, and Security first began formally, it's been going on for much longer than this, but first began formally in 2000, and on October 31st, 2000, when the government of Bangladesh, who was the president of the Security Council of the United Nations, brought forward the resolution called 1325 on women, peace, and security with other member states, and a lot of civil society push and activism. So women, peace, and security is seen by many as the resolution and the agenda for and by the people, because women's organizations and women's movement really brought this forward and made sure that this was going to happen. So women, peace, and security, and through the foundation of 1325, the adoption of this Security Council resolution is based on four main pillars. And so here I've listed the pillars, so participation, prevention, protection, and relief and recovery. These are the different ways that Women, Peace, and Security advocates for the inclusion of women in all spaces and ensuring that they are equally represented, protected, and considered in all aspects. This is not exclusively about conflict. This is about peace and security, and peace does not only mean conflict-free societies. It can also mean about it can also be about social justice and human rights and the attainment of those rights and being able to freely live those rights. And so that includes, for example, political participation, participation in peace processes, participation within governance structures, and all of that wonderfulness. Now, the next is youth, peace, and security. So youth, peace, and security, you can maybe visualize this as being the little sister of Women, Peace, and Security. That's how I like to explain it, so that it's conceptualized a little bit easier for folks. And so essentially, Women, Peace, and Security is turning 20 years old in just a few days. Youth, Peace, and Security, on the other hand, is turning 5 years old on December 9th. So it was adopted in 2015 with the Security Council resolution called 2250. And the reason why I emphasize so much that it's the little sister, for example, or the little sibling, because this one is not gendered, of Women, Peace, and Security, is because a lot of the activism that has happened since 2000 and until 2015 for youth, peace, and security has largely been modeled under what successes happened for women, peace, and security and the establishment of that agenda. So youth, peace, and security in a lot of ways is a continuity of the activism that happened for women, peace, and security. And a lot of the best practices or the successes that we've seen with women, peace, and security, albeit there are a lot of challenges, the successes at least have been pulled by certain actors, especially civil society, to implement and to put forward the youth, peace, and security agenda. This one is framed under 5 different pillars. So participation, just like women, peace, and security, protection, prevention, partnership, and disengagement and reintegration. The big thing that we have to remember here, and that's a little bit more unique, is the partnerships part. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in my next slide. But youth, peace, and security has a very big component about partnerships with local local organizations, local individuals, but also with global partnerships and partnerships with other agendas under peace and security and other efforts. This is groundbreaking in terms of the UN because silos are essentially our demon within the international community, if you wish. I'm not too sure if I'm vocalizing this the best I can, but essentially if you're thinking about implementing a program, well, often you'll be asked, well, under which agenda are you going to do it? Not which agendas will you be doing this? And this is an issue and very problematic because young people and people in general don't live their lives as one facet. We are intersectional in our beings, as you must know, or you probably know. And so, for example, myself, I am both a young person and I am both a woman at the same time. I can't live one day saying, oh, I'm a woman today, tomorrow I'm only young, and I'm pretending that both of these don't work together. And so to be able to implement both of these agendas, we need to do it simultaneously and in partnership, and other agendas as well, because they are complementary and not in competition with each other. And hence why there is the Women, Peace and Security and Youth, Peace and Security agenda and the call for the synergies between the two. Now, if you're still following, which I hope I've been very clear and specific in my way of explaining, but if there are questions, please, we will talk about them. I'm very happy to answer any technical but also theoretical questions. And so we've been calling, we being Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and other entities, for the synergy between women, peace and security and youth, peace and security. And 2020 is a specific time for this because it is also the 25th anniversary of what is called the Beijing Platform and Declaration for Action. So in 1995, there was the 4th World Conference on Women, and this was happening in Beijing, China. And after 1995's conference, there was the adoption of the declaration from the conference, which we call the Beijing which we call Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Now we're 25 years later, and we are, as an international community, celebrating the achievements of this platform because it is still, to this day, 25 years later, the most progressive women's rights framework in the world, because we've had a lot of missteps, but also a lot of achievements. And so we are looking, we being the international community, for recommitment by governance, UN entities, different international actors, including the private sector, pardon me, to the Beijing Platform for Action. So the UN Women and others have created this campaign called Generation Equality. And within Generation Equality, there are different components of the work to make sure that the Beijing Plus 25 review and recommitment is successful. Now with COVID, we had a little bit of delays, but nonetheless, it gives us a little bit more time to work on this. Under Generation Equality, for the review of the Beijing Platform for Action, they have created action coalitions on various components of women's rights under the Beijing Platform. In these, they do not include women, peace and security, or youth, peace and security. And so civil society gathered together and were quite disappointed, honestly, with the lack of mainstreaming of women, peace and security and youth, peace and security, and decided to create their own action coalition, a civil society-led action coalition. So the Beijing Plus 25 Action Coalition on Women, Peace, Security, and Youth, Peace and Security. And through multiple, I cannot tell you how many meetings, how many activities that went on for this, they finally were able to create something that is recognized by the UN, recognized by UN Women, led by civil society, UN, private sector, youth and women's rights organizations, to create something called the Compact Coalition on Women, Peace and Security, and they tossed in humanitarian action. A lot of the work is intertwined, and so that is complementary to the work. And so this month, actually, and you can stay tuned because at the end of this month, UN Women will announce who the board and catalytic members of this coalition, so the governance of this Compact Coalition, will be. And essentially the purpose at its very core of this new Compact Coalition within the whole framework of the Beijing Review and Generation Equality campaign is to mainstream women, peace and security, youth, peace and security, and humanitarian action through all of the activities that are happening, to make sure that the Compact is helping to mainstream this, monitor this, and to ensure that every single one of the actors who is working to review the declaration of the Beijing 1995 conference, and also all of the progress and non-progress that has been made, includes across the board women, peace and security, youth, peace and security. And this speaks to the power of civil society, because the advocacy that has happened, as I said, including women and young people, is what brought meaningful change to the process of what I consider to be a mishap or an overlook of the considerations within the Generation Equality Forum. Now, I'm getting too close to my 40 minutes, so I'm going to talk about what we've done in Canada about this and what you can maybe do in your community, or how you could get involved. So in Canada, as you may suspect, there have been a lot of efforts made by our government and by organizations to ensure the adoption of women, peace and security and youth, peace and security, and the implementation abroad. I mention abroad specifically because WPS and YPS in wealthier countries is often and mostly only seen as a foreign affairs issue. It's not seen as a domestic problem. And I think that's kind of ironic, because peace and security, regardless of what you put in front of it, is everyone's problem. We are all a part of this. We all have a role to play in maintaining peace and security in our communities, in our countries, in the world, and we all live not in silos, as I said at the beginning. For example, I live with 2 other people. If I'm not peaceful and I don't ensure their security, and vice versa, it's not going to vibe very well. And so we created a Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security with the premise that we believe that, for one, youth, peace and security needed to be mainstreamed in Canada, because young people didn't understand, or still don't understand, why it's relevant to them, because we live in a peaceful community, but also to engage further in the international and foreign affairs aspect of this. So I can't speak about domestic aspects of peace and security without being a little bit of a academic here. And so I have to talk to you about Mr. Johann Galtung from 1969, with his 1969 theory on positive and negative peace. And if there's one thing I want you to understand today, this is one of them. And so positive and negative peace theory is essentially the understanding that that the lack of violence and overt violence does not create positive peace. Positive peace is when human rights and social justice in an environment can thrive. And so we are all, every single one of us, or should all, be thriving to live in positive peace. We should not be settling for negative peace, which is just the absence of violence. Obviously, this is very theoretical and very idealistic, but nonetheless, I think, or at least I try with my contributions, to contribute to the attainment of positive peace without being colonial in my approach, but nonetheless, with the goal of creating a positive peace in the communities that I work in, including my own. And so that's a big part of why the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security exists, and why we fundamentally believe that peace and security is relevant within a wealthy, developed, or non-violent country. The other part is about the foreign affairs agenda. And so in a Canadian context, we have a national action plan on women, peace and security. So a plan that our government developed and adopted on implementing women, peace and security in Canada and abroad. Now, well, especially abroad. Now, we don't have any of that for youth, peace and security. Now, as I said, it's only 5 years old. Perhaps we need to give them all a break and, things will work out. But I don't actually believe that it'll work out without any push from us as civil society. And so another reason we created the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security is to mainstream our work that we are doing as civil society actors and non-governmental organizations and individuals, is to ensure that youth, peace, and security becomes a priority of all of our governments, but especially our own, in understanding and asking the question of where are the young people? Now, as Jessica mentioned at the beginning, I was the Parliamentary Affairs Advisor to a senator who has been fantastic in my upbringing, or my coming of age, if you wish, in this field. And one thing that I really took from my experience within the Senate of Canada and within global politics, because a lot of the work we did was with the UN and international human rights, was that I was almost exclusively always the youngest and the only young person in the room when we were talking about policy, when we were talking about accountability mechanism, and when we were considering even legislation to be drafted. I was the youngest Parliamentary Affairs Advisor in the Senate. That is a senior role, the second most senior role as a staff that you can have. And I was by far the youngest. I don't mean like a year younger than most people. And so the question that I want to pose, and I think that we should, and I encourage you to pose, is where are the young people? I mean, my contributions are no less important than others who are older and who may have different experiences. And I come back to this in the beginning where I said our experiences shape who we are, and they shape our expertise. We all have various levels of expertise and different components of our expertise. And it's not because you have 30 years experience that you're any more of an expert in certain subjects than other people. So I really want us to remember and take away from this talk that our expertise is grounded in who we are and our experiences, and that a degree or years of experience do not make us necessarily an expert. Just because I may work in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and for numerous years, I am not the sole or best expert on the reality of how young women live their lives in the DRC. The young women themselves are the experts about their realities and are the ones that should be at that table. And so I'm going to close my part of the talk and open it up for discussion with this quote that a young woman once told me. She once told me, "We are all a piece of peace." And I think that's a kind of funny, catchy way of saying that we all have a fundamental role to play in the attainment of peace and security across the world. And by building bridges, building partnerships, uplifting each other's work and voices, that is the only way we'll be able to sustain a peaceful solution to our world problems. So thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it back maybe to you, Jessica, if you want to moderate some sort of Q&A or a discussion. And I'm really excited to hear what your thoughts are about the presentation and my thoughts that I've shared with you, but also what you're doing in your community and in your organizations on this topic.
Thank you, Katrina. I have seen so many comments come through the box of people just agreeing with you, giving the big thumbs up. A lot of chatter on Twitter, raising up some voices, so very exciting. I know the last thing that I saw in one of your slides that I just absolutely love is my feminism will be intersectional or it will be bullshit, which I'm like, yes. And I know I saw a lot of other people like that online. And in so many ways, it's so important in this big global moment. And, you know, the youth are there. And I know you raised the question of, you know, it's about really finding them and spotlighting them, because a lot of times we're yelling at the system and we're constantly being put to the side saying we don't know any better, you don't have the experience, you don't have the knowledge. But we do, I completely agree, it's not about empowerment, it's about letting people have the space to demonstrate their skills and their capacities. I mean, even when it comes to, you know, doing talks like this, a lot of times we only hear people who are 50 years or older saying we can't do it at this age, we don't know how, we need the training. And you prove we're more than capable. We're all here having a discussion and learning and growing with each other. So on that note, I want to open it up for questions for anybody who has a question for Katrina. Just raise your hand on the chat box. Or feel free to join in. I know it's sometimes hard if you're calling in on the phone. So one comment is, I would like to hear more about the threats to peace and security. It would help my understanding of this topic. That's a big one. I'll let you take that, Katrina.
Yes, it's a pretty loaded question, Carlin. Thank you for raising it. I mean, I see, obviously there are multiple threats to peace and security, and I see 3 of them as being primary, at least in my reality or in my experience. The first, it's obviously about violence. So peace and security is supposed to make sure that there is no overt violence or non-overt violence really in communities. So the threat to peace and security is the direct threat to peace and security is violence nonetheless. So that's one of them. The other is about buy-in. And so we've seen, especially with the lessons learned from women peace and security and youth peace and security, the buy-in of international actors in terms of understanding the realities of women and young people, but also about wanting to take like political will essentially. And so to buy into these agendas and to want to take action, to want to fund, for example, the youth-led project, to want to fund the women's organization working on the ground. A lot of times donors, and this is funny because I was actually reading a lot about this in the recent weeks, is a lot of donors have their own agenda coming into development work. And so there is no actual buy-in both from them in terms of what people on the ground want or need, but there's no buy-in from the local perspective either, because if you're importing some sort of project or something and trying to mitigate peace and security risks, so violence and humanitarian disasters or different situations where people are not safe, there needs to be local ownership and buy-in. Otherwise, this will never work. When you leave as an international entity, the project will stop and the benefits of them will cease if they were ever beneficial at all. If there was never any buy-in, they may not even be beneficial. And so that's a part of it, and that all ties into colonization in some sort of new form. And that's a big question in itself. And then the other one is about participation. So participation in the sense of participation in the conceptualization of a program or conceptualization of an initiative. There's also a huge problem with political participation, and this goes back to the buy-in and even the violence, because it's been proven by countless times by research that women, for example, are more successful in peace process negotiations. There are a number of peace processes where women were leads, and research just shows that women are more likely to create more sustainable solutions within peace processes, whether they're formal or non-formal. But it show us more women, but there peace processes.
Well, Katrina, you're kind of breaking up a little bit.
Sorry, am I back?
There you are.
Sorry, I think the Wi-Fi cut out. So I was just saying essentially that I think that participation in peace and security is essential, and is another part of the essentialness of peace and security, and the lack thereof is another threat. And I was giving the statistic, and I'm not sure if you heard this, but essentially there's been substantive research that shows that women are more likely to bring peaceful solutions, especially within negotiations of peace processes, but they are almost only ever involved in non-formal agreements and non-formal negotiations. And whenever it's the formal peace processes or peace negotiations or policy making in those initiatives, the statistics show that women are much, much less included. And therefore, that's a threat in itself to peace and security, because without understanding or acknowledging the need for gender-sensitive solutions and youth and age-sensitive solutions, understanding that people live their lives and experience things differently, that they can't create peaceful solutions. So I hope that answers your question. And if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Another question? You can put it in the chat box. You could unmute yourself. Well, so I put in the chat box for everyone to know, if you're interested in following this work, there is a hashtag that you can see different actors working in this area for the big anniversary this month on Women, Peace, and Security. It's hashtag WPS in 2020. And so, Katrina, if you could talk to the group about things that GNWP is doing, because you're doing a lot, and then what to anticipate, like what does it look like on the global stage, you know, with the big UN Security Council meeting, you know, what does that look like? How can people tune into that? How can they be more involved in, whether it's through GNWP or, you know, initiatives themselves, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, so this month, as we've said, is the 20th anniversary. And every year, actually, it doesn't have to be the 20th to do this. Every year, we celebrate the anniversary of Women, Peace, and Security with the whole month of activities, and especially the last week of October, because the anniversary in itself, the day of, is the 31st. And so GNWP, the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, is hosting a number of events this month. So actually, I was pulling up as you were talking kind of our list of events. So I'll share it maybe, and I can talk briefly about each of them to explain to you why certain aspects of them relate they all relate to women, peace, and security, and most of them to youth, peace, and security. But so, for example, I talked to you about the Compact Coalition on Women, Peace, and Security and Humanitarian Action, and I talked to you about this in the context of the Beijing +25 review process. And so on Thursday, a few days ago, we actually hosted an event to further understand what the Compact was, if it's useful, and what the purpose of it is. Is it fit for purpose? And so this was part one of an event that will be followed by UN Women's official launch of the governance structure of the Compact, which I do encourage you to stay tuned for, and perhaps the Zahara's Dream platform on social media, if you check that, we'll be reposting about the event, and I can make sure that the team receives the information when it's public. But the last week of October, there'll be an official event on this hosted by UN Women. The next event that GNWP is hosting is actually on this Thursday coming up. And we're hosting an event with the Women, Peace, and Humanitarian Fund and the Austrian Development Cooperation. And this one is specific to the voices of women, peace builders, and first responders within the context of COVID-19. So women and young women have been doing tremendous work within the context of COVID-19. And I mean, as most of us are in quarantine or have been isolating for the last few months, COVID-19 has continued to, for example, devastate certain communities. Well, I mean, it has devastated us all, but it's devastated certain communities, for example, in refugee camps, in places where there is no direct access to healthcare. And so women peace builders especially, and young peace builders have actually become first responders in a lot of cases for COVID-19 recovery, and have ensured safety of a lot of community members. So that's what they'll be talking about on Thursday. And I can send you this document, Jessica, if you want to distribute it afterwards. The next event after that is actually about humanitarian action and how it's relevant to women, peace, and security. Because just like women, peace, and security and youth, peace, and security are related, women, peace, and security and humanitarian action are interrelated, as you can suspect. And a lot of actors in both areas are reticent of this synergy between the two, and are, again, scared of being in competition for resources, which is often why synergies are not super widely accepted by certain people or certain groups. And so here we're hosting an event about the work about how both of them can meet and work in synergy and in tandem. We're hosting also, this is actually quite exciting, we're hosting a database launch about women, peace, and security and the impact of COVID-19 on women, peace, and security. So we're excited for this one as well, because we've been tracking and monitoring the impact of COVID-19 on women, peace, and security with our partners, which we have over 100 partners in over 40 different countries, mostly in the global south, but not exclusively. And so they've been doing a tremendous job on tracking the impact of women, peace, and security, and also countering the impact and addressing the impacts in their communities. So stay tuned for that. That one will be fantastic. And then the last event that we're hosting in the context of the overall anniversary month is about moving forward. So evaluating what has happened in the last 2 decades, but also moving forward about what the Women, Peace and Security agenda needs. And this is with the Permanent Mission of Ireland and UN Women, and is part of consultations that were conducted pre-COVID and during COVID in South Africa, Uganda, Northern Ireland, and Colombia. And so we'll have speakers from those regions as well. Now, the last thing I wanted to add before I turn it back to you again, Jessica, is about the open debate on 1325. And so the 31st of October, as I said, is the anniversary of the resolution's adoption. But usually every year around that date, not necessarily on that date, the Security Council hosts something called the open debate. And they do open debates on other topics, but this one's exclusively on women, peace, and security. And essentially, it is a moment, a very big advocacy moment for us as civil society, but it's a moment for the Secretary General and the Executive Director of UN Women to go and report back on the status of women, peace, and security as it is in the world. And then for a civil society briefer, this year, I believe it's going to be an Afghan woman who will speak about the status from her perspective, and especially within her context. And then after that, it's essentially a long list of declarations from countries about their commitment to women, peace, and security, what priorities they have for the upcoming year, or which ones they had, and kind of a report back in some way. And so I invite you to tune in. It's public, it's available online on the UN Web TV website. If you follow the YPS in 2020 hashtag, it will obviously come up. This year, I believe it's been confirmed for the 29th of October. It starts at 10 a.m. New York time and runs until the late evening, depending on how long statements take. So please do tune in. It's a great way for you to get involved in global governance and advocacy work, and also understand the priorities of different countries and your own country. And it's also, at least for us, a way to keep them accountable for the work that they have committed to be doing, because they are publicly sharing their peace priorities and women, peace, and security priorities, and therefore they are accountable for what they're claiming to be committing to do.
You can also follow your country's UN mission online on Twitter and tweet at them, because they do follow it. So that's another way of putting your thoughts out about their commitments or lack thereof. And then Katrina, last thing, it may be too early to say, but with the Youth, Peace, and Security anniversary, is there anything planned yet for December?
Yeah, so there's a number of things in the works for December. So as I said, the anniversary is the 9th of December. It's also very close to the UN Human Rights Day. So Human Rights Day is actually December 10th. So often things are really busy at that time. So there is a global conference called PeaceCon 2020, which is an annual conference on peace and security. There's a very, very big focus on youth this year. So I implore you to register for that conference if you wish. It's hosted by a number of international and US-based actors, including the US Coalition on Youth, Peace, and Security. And it'll be quite interactive, and so you'll get probably a lot from that. There are talks about whether or not there may be some sort of event within the UN Security Council on this topic. There are no confirmations so far, but what I suggest you do is you can also track the hashtag youth4 with the letter of the number 4 peace. So Youth for Peace hashtag on social media, which is a very widely distributed hashtag. The other account that you can obviously share, you can obviously follow the Canadian Coalition on Youth, Peace, and Security on Twitter, which will be sharing all these things as they become available. But you can also follow the UN Youth Envoy on social media. Her account usually shares a wide array of opportunities for young people and showcases their engagement as well. And once things become available, I'm sure she'll be posting as well.
Great. Well, I realize what time it is, so I will if anybody has a burning last question that you want to ask before we in the meeting, let me know. Just go ahead and say, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. Well, thank you, Katrina, so much for your time today. It was very informative, and I always love advocating on how we can all get involved, especially on the global level together. So thank you again. Keep doing what you're doing. This month is very tough for you, but you're doing brilliant.
Thank you so much, and thank you to you, Jessica, and the whole Zahara's Dream team. Looking forward to continued engagement in the WPS and YPS world.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Happy Saturday.
Thank you, everyone.